Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be responding to your bookish hot takes. I asked you on YouTube, in a community post, and over on Instagram what your bookish hot takes were, and y'all really provided. There were so many to choose from. I feel like I grabbed the most interesting ones to discuss, and I mean, really, I feel like these videos inevitably turn into whoever's making the video providing their own opinions, right? My own hot takes in response to your hot takes. So it's basically just going to be me talking about bookish things for however long this video is, and I'm excited about it. Preamble, this will not be including any hot takes on authors or books, not because I'm above it, I certainly am not, but I feel like the majority of the hot takes were not very hot, you know? No offense to y'all, but in that regard, not so hot, you know? Like, I don't like Colleen Hoover, or like, I don't think Fourth Wing's good. I get it, like, but that's not really that hot, and I don't really have much to say about those things that I haven't already said. The majority of the stuff is just like bookish hot takes. I feel like it's been a while since I've kind of like talked about my thoughts on like community and things like that, but a lot of y'all were angry, and I am ready to dive in, so let's do it. First up, this one's a long one. Recent trend of hate reading popular books like Agatar, Fourth Wing, etc., and critiquing them does more harm than good, as you're still giving them viewership and not books from lesser known authors that could use some eyes on them. I greatly enjoy these videos myself, but it does seem counterproductive in the long run. Ooh, this one's tough for me because obviously I am not above doing things for views. I think most people who make videos on the internet at some point or another think about views, and it's really easy to capitalize on books that so many people have read, and I think that's why a lot of creators like to do videos for these things. But I understand what you're saying though, like, are we taking away, I guess, opportunities when it comes to talking about books that have less eyes on them? I guess it really just depends on what the point of your channel and what your videos are about. And I think that that is something that is interesting to me from a like book community centric perspective. This is going to be maybe a hot take. I feel like because of what books are and what books represent to people, I think that people tend to think that if you're doing anything book related, it has to be altruistic, or it has to be something that is just because you love reading, you know? And don't get me wrong, I do really enjoy reading, but reading is actually not why I have this channel. I initially created this channel not to share my love of reading with the world or like find a community necessarily. I liked the idea of making book-centric videos. Like, I wanted to make things that would entertain and inform around books. Saying that out loud, people are gonna, I'm sure, be in the comments enraged, like, but that's not pure. But that's the thing, is that like, is anything pure? And I think no matter what your intentions, that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. I think it's equally as valid to like create a channel to talk about popular books to get views to make money as it is to create a channel to just talk about your favorite books and maybe find community around them. Like, I don't think that there is a right or a wrong answer. So coming back to the question, I guess, or coming back to the hot take, hate reading popular things to like get views, I think it just really depends on that person's goals, right? And I think that a lot of the times we just ignore that. We like ignore people's goals or intentions when they're making things beyond just the obvious, like, oh, they're looking for views. But like, is that a bad thing? I don't know. I'm sure people will argue that it is, but yeah, I don't know. I personally try to strike a balance here. Like, I personally try to make things that are entertaining and click worthy, but I also do try to read things that personally interest me and that could maybe like help you find your next good book. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's a balance to be found. I don't know that it's a bad thing. Oh, this one gets me. The trend online for slow readers to bash on fast reading or people who read a lot of books is loser behavior. Literally no fast reader has ever made reading out to be a competition, but some slow readers act like they're being pressured. Yeah, this one really irritates me as someone who very clearly talks quickly. I listen to audiobooks at 3 times speed, most of them. And to me, that is slower than the speed at which I physically read a book, okay? So to me, I can very much understand the audiobook speed. I can understand when I'm reading at a very quick clip. And I just don't understand why it bothers people, as if because you are incapable of something, that makes it so you can't comprehend that other people can do that thing. I just think it's fucked up, but it just irritates me when people have this need to bitch about those things. Like, it's so insignificant. It so doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. Just allow people to read at the speed at which they read. And again, I think it comes down to intentionality, right? And what we think pure intentions are. Some people read to compete with themselves. Some people read just for the joy of reading. And I think oftentimes people that read for the joy of reading, I guess, get irritated by the fact that like people are reading at a quick speed. I don't get it. Again, everybody has like different intentions when they set out to do things, but it's just weird, I guess, that in this community in specific, it's incomprehensible that people might have different goals. Moving on. I feel like mass market paperbacks are underappreciated. It's my favorite format outside of ebook. They're especially necessary since books become more expensive expensive, and they usually find a wider audience because they can be bought at many places. I hate how publishers turn their back on them. Also, hardback releases have no place in romance. That last part is gonna kill me. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I love a hardback romance. I am hard on my books. I kind of throw them around. I dog-ear pages. I am not easy on my books. I'm not precious about any of the belongings in my life. I don't treat the things in my life like shit, I should say, but I think that they are things for a reason, right? Like, so for me, I like a hardcover because they tend to hold up better over time, and I can't stand mass market paperbacks. That is just a hill I am willing to die on. I really do like that they exist. I like that they, open up a broader audience to a book. However, I don't like them as a format. They are hard on my eyes. I don't like the way that they feel holding them. For some reason, they're like harder for me to hold than other books. So no, I disagree with that. I think paranormal romance as a genre has a lot of potential, but it's almost impossible to find an actually good romance. They are all so unoriginal and contain the same three tropes: alpha males, clumsy, insecure, female heroines, and sexual harassment. Also, the world building is lacking. Usually the fantasy part is bad, or the romance part, or both. I think this is an interesting take. I think the reason for some of those tropes is just the time in which most paranormal romances were written. And I also find that as genres kind of become more popular, especially more niche genres, they tend to like rise up altogether, right? Like when Twilight was a thing, we saw so many Twilight books come out, or very similar books to Twilight, right? And a lot of those same tropes and conventions were used because that's what made Twilight popular, right? It's not because you can't write a vampire book in a different way, but because that is successful. And I think that a lot of those books that were published kind of around that time in the 2000s, like that's what a lot of romances were, even outside of paranormal, was like alpha males, clumsy, insecure heroines. Like, that being said, I still really love a lot of the paranormal romances because I think I can appreciate those genre conventions, right? It's like a feature, not a bug, if you will. But I totally get where you're coming from. And I would love to see a resurgence of paranormal romance because I love them at my core. Anyway, dubcon, dubious consent, should not be quite literally romanticized in books. This one's hard. And a lot of y'all came down on age gap romances, dark romances, things like that. And I feel like I'm of two opinions with this. Like, on the one hand, the older I get, the less that I tend to be into these things. Like, I just feel like I tend to want really conventional romance with like two flawed people who come together and ostensibly make it work. And so I'm less, I think, drawn to these like super unconventional or potentially harmful things. But on the other hand, I think that literature is a safe way to explore things that people might be curious about, right? This is probably another hot take that someone has later on. I really push back against this idea that romance or things that we read in books are going to influence us to accept that kind of behavior in real life. I read a lot of problematic romances growing up, but I didn't seek those out. I think it's much more of a problem if like you're seeing those relationship types in your real life. I think you're probably more likely to like imitate them or like subconsciously imitate them from real life circumstances than in books. I just think that books in general have always been a safe space for me to explore things that I might not want to explore in real life or like I'm just curious about. So it's tough for me. Like, I don't condone these things necessarily, like the things that happen in like Haunting Adeline, for instance. I don't want that to happen to me in real life. I really have no interest in reading that. But is it wrong that those books exist? I don't think so, personally. I feel that way about most books, though. Even books with like harmful messaging or content or whatever, I think it's really up to reader discretion. I think I've tried to communicate that in the past, right? That like I think that readers are smart enough to make decisions for themselves. And I think a lot of this comes from this sort of like paternalistic mindset that like aren't able to interpret things for themselves. And I just think that's incorrect. I don't necessarily love these books. I don't necessarily pick these up on my own, but I don't hate that they exist necessarily. It doesn't bother me, I think, as much as it bothers a lot of people. There's a lot of influencers who really look down on traditionally published books because they're not as spicy as indie books. Like, if a romance book's closed door, fade to black, etc., it's automatically gonna be boring. I like sex scenes in my romance, but I'm fine if they're not there if the story's good. I kind of agree with this. I don't know if I agree that influencers don't enjoy traditionally published romance. I think, by and large, a lot of them do, but I think it's interesting seeing the differences in a way. Like, indie romance is a lot more smutty, and I think a lot of that has to do with the rise and the popularity of smutty romances in book spaces, book talk, YouTube, whatever. I think authors try to write to what is interesting people, right? And I think for me, I'm getting bored of it, I think, to an extent. Like, I'm not looking for the most creative way to like cram things in holes. Like, that's just not really for me necessarily. But I don't necessarily think it's bad either to gravitate towards indies because it has content that you like, you know what I mean? And I don't think that people look down on traditionally published romance either. I don't know. I feel like I see, at least in the people that what I watch, a fairly balanced approach to both. I feel like I see people read both, and I read both myself. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know. I don't feel like I look down on traditionally published romance, and maybe I did a couple of years ago when I was younger, like was just craving more sex in books, but now that it's so oversaturated, and I feel like now that there's so much sex in every book, I just don't really feel that way anymore. I don't really feel like I'm necessarily more drawn to indie over traditionally published for that reason. I still am more drawn to indie romances, but for different reasons. So anyway, stop buying books, start using your library. It's good for the community, for the planet, and for your wallet. I like a balanced approach. I'm gonna say it. I love my library. I really do think that more people should get access to their library, especially for audiobooks. If you are an audiobook listener and you do not have access or have not gotten access to a public library, please do. You won't be putting money in the pockets of Amazon, which is really fucking cool. And you don't have to pay for an audiobook that you may or may not listen to again, which I think is really, really nice. I also read a lot of ebooks and stuff too through my library, but I don't think that like you can't buy books and that's like terrible or whatever. I think that a lot of the discussion about books and consumerism is a little bit overblown. I mean, again, I don't think you need 15 copies of the same book necessarily and like a bunch of special editions, but I think it's perfectly fine to buy books. Romance books should never be over 350 to 400 pages. A lot of y'all said this. I totally agree with this one. Like, why? I think that is my one complaint about the rise of Kindle Unlimited and the consequences of it. KU books, if you didn't know, are paid out on pages read, so it does kind of incentivize authors to make their books longer than they would be otherwise. And I don't know how much of this is because of KU and the page length thing, or if it is because indie books are edited a little bit differently than traditionally published ones, but I agree. I just think books are bloated, and I feel like editing's good. We love editing. Okay, this one. There were so many conversations from y'all on TikTok, right? So many hot takes on TikTok. This one I thought was interesting, the most interesting. TikTok is not killing the quality of books being published. It literally saved Barnes & Noble from bankruptcy. The more books that get published via traditional or indie, the better. It's snobbish to turn one's nose up and arbitrarily assign what constitutes as a good quality book, when at the end of the day, reading purely for escapism is valid reading as well. Let the kids read and recommend what they want, leave them be. I agree with this. I really do. I think probably because of the space that I occupy, which is obviously BookTube. I'm not on BookTok. A lot of the hot takes were just like bitching and ripping on BookTok and saying that all the recommendations on BookTok are terrible. And because I'm like, I don't post to BookTok, I also don't get any BookTok on my feed because like that's just not what I'm looking for. I feel like I don't have a real educated opinion on that, but I do think that it's probably a little unfair to say that a community as a whole is like ruining publishing or that they are recommending horrible books. I think maybe you're just not finding the right creators for you at that point, and that goes for BookTube and BookTok, right? I also think TikTok's algorithm and just the way that TikTok thrives is by making videos that are catchy and quick and entertaining. So sometimes maybe you're watching a video and it's really short and someone's recommending a book really quickly based on like tropes and blurbs or like little lines and passages from the book, and maybe that's not exactly enough information for you to go off of to pick up a book, and maybe you pick up a book that's not right for you. I think part of it could come down to format. I don't know. I just it does irritate me. I think this like constant bitching about TikTok, and I think I was maybe a little bit more, I don't know, like, yeah, I don't feel like you can find book recommendations there. I feel like it was maybe a little bit more like that a few years ago, but I just don't feel like that anymore. I feel like in any space at this point, in any bookish space online, you can find good recommendations. I think it's just a matter of like where you're looking. So I don't think it's killing the quality of books being published, and I also agree, like I do think in a big way BookTok has saved a lot of the publishing industry. You know, maybe that irritates you, but I'm personally fine with it, and you know, maybe there are some like semi-irritating consequences, again, like books being so smutty just because that's what like sells quickly in like a 5-second video, but like that's okay if more books are being published, you know what I mean? I think it's okay. While I respect the grind, people who read 300 plus books a year cannot be remembering or enjoying them. I don't know about this one. I don't know about this one. On the one hand, I definitely read books every year that I won't remember. On the other hand, I don't think the volume of books is really what's influencing that. I think it's just some books are really fucking forgettable. That being said, I don't know how people get through 100 or 300 books per year. That's a lot of fucking books. But again, I think it comes back to like, why are we trying to judge people for reading a lot, reading quickly? If it's a competition for them, it's a competition for them. Maybe it's not a competition for you, but why does it bother you? You know what I mean? Live and let live. I don't like romance in books. I think it's overdone and it needs to stop being the B plot to every book. I actually agree with this. I mean, if it's a romance, I want a romance in my romance. But in other genres, I do think that there is just too much of a push for romance, and I think sometimes it can take away from the other aspects of a storyline. I mean, I feel like that about other tropes or like other things thrown into books sometimes. I'm like, oh god, why is this being included? I want to get back to the fantasy. Yeah, I think because romance sells, really, really well. People are including it in their books, but I think sometimes if it doesn't come naturally to the story, it's okay. It's okay for romance not to be in there. Most romances have too much spice. I like just a few sex scenes, more than that, and it feels oversaturated. I agree with this. And here's the thing, you can create the most delicious tension every single time for every single sex scene, and it could just, like, I could be so excited to read them, but after the first one or two, I'm gonna get bored. Like, I don't care how good of a writer you are, it's not that fun. I mean, the reason that sex in books is so exciting to people, in my humble opinion, for most people, is because it is the culmination of a relationship, right? Like, you're finally getting to that point. And I mean, I'm not saying it's the culmination for everyone's relationship, like ace people exist for sure, or people who don't want to have sex, I get it. But it's supposed to be this, like, tantalizing, like, exciting, like, cherry on the fucking sundae of a relationship. I do feel often now romances are just so bogged down by the smut that we're not actually seeing the romance develop, and I'm literally just reading about dick, and I don't care about dick. I'm gonna be honest, sex scenes should be used sparingly and well, and cut it down. Just cut it down. I hate the word bookish. I do too. I don't know. I kind of don't like the word. I don't know why. I can't put it into words, but someone else did, and I agree. Rereading books is a waste of time. That's certainly a take. That is certainly a take. I kind of agree to an extent. Again, it comes back to goals. Like, what is your goal? Is your goal to, like, read as many books in your lifetime as possible? Is it to, like, find books as an escape or, like, an enjoyment, a pleasure, whatever? For me, I reread things when I'm feeling slumpy or when I, like, want some comfort, but overall I do feel like rereading to an extent is a waste of time for me, and because this is my career, right? Like, I want to entertain you and talk about, like, new books, exciting things, so rereading stuff is kind of a waste of my personal time. But, like, for your average reader, if a book excites you and it's comforting, read that shit. Reread it over and over. It's fine. I count my DNFs toward my reading goal for the year. To each their own. That's not my journey, personally. I think you can do whatever you want, clearly. You can rate your DNFs, they can be a part of your reading challenge for the year, whatever. I personally don't do either, if you're curious. I do not count my DNFs towards my reading challenge, and I also do not rate books that I DNF. I don't think it's wrong to do either. I think if I were to do one or the other, I'd probably rate my DNFs. Like, if it's for sure offensive or, like, something I can't finish because of that reason, like, if you want to rate it 1 star or whatever, I just don't personally do that. That's just my own take. Author social media promos of their books is getting cringy. I feel like I don't see a ton of author promos, so, like, I can't necessarily comment on that, but here's the thing, again, in this economy, when there are so many indie romance authors, especially indie romance authors, you gotta find a way to get people excited. And if it is talking about your own characters like they're characters you read in someone else's book and you're squealing over them, fucking go for it, you know what I mean? I might mute you so I don't have to look at it, but, you know, I respect it because you're out there making money, you know, and I'm not above it. I'll probably do the same shit, let's be real. When people say things like TBR in real life, it creeps me out. That's valid, I guess. I mean, I kind of feel the same way. About, like, gamers when they say, like, GG and shit, like, in real life. It's a little cringe to me, but also it's like, you're a part of a community, and if you're talking to other people who are in that same community and you talk about your TBR in real life, I don't care. It's not cringy to me. Sometimes when you're, like, not a part of that community and you use their own slang, it's a little weird, but it's fine. It's harmless. I love a shirtless man on a cover. I hate cartoon covers. And you know what? I fucking agree. I agree wholeheartedly. I am all for women and people who read romance proudly saying, I want a shirtless man on my cover, and I am going to read this on the fucking subway in public. I don't like that there's still that stigma we haven't quite broken through, right? A lot of us proudly read romance, or, like, we're getting there, but, like, we're not quite there. I think we're fooling ourselves about the cartoon covers. Oh, I just like it more. Do you really? Do you really? I don't. I don't think I can go back to reading physical books. Audiobooks and ebooks all the way. And you know what? I kind of agree with this. On occasion, we'll read a paperback, but to be honest, like, the majority of my reading is ebook and audiobook at this point. It's so convenient. You can bring it anywhere. And I think one thing that's really, I think, exemplary of my laziness is the fact that I fucking hate moving around. If I forget something upstairs, I'm just like, it's not a good day. Like, if I've already gone downstairs for the night, I'm, like, done working, I'm in bed, I'm getting cozy, and I'm like, God damn it, I left my book upstairs. With my phone, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that because I've got it with me. I totally get it. It's also, like, more physically comfortable to read in bed on my phone or, like, on an iPad or whatever. So yeah, I definitely kind of agree with that. But I do still have physical books. I think they're pretty. And I do like collecting them. I'm gonna be honest. And when I say collecting, like, my version of collecting, if anyone was curious, I know no one was, I might have a special edition for, like, my most favorite books, or maybe I'll have, like, 2 copies of one book if they're, like, different editions. Mostly though, I like to own books that I love, right? So if I read a book via Kindle Unlimited, that's great. And I also would love to support the author and buy the paperback version. So that's just my take. I hate books about books or when main characters are readers. I kind of agree. I don't know what it is about authors like pushing so hard, especially for the main characters who are readers. Characters can have other hobbies in books and they don't talk about them nearly as much as characters who are readers in books. You know what I mean? Like, I read this smutty scene in my book. Oh my god, this is just like that one. Like, shut up. Like, I don't want to, it's irritating to me. And I feel like y'all get it too. Y'all get it. Age gaps gross me out if both characters aren't over 26. Again, that comes back to the discussion we kind of already had, so I'm not gonna rehash that too much, but in real life, 100% agree. In books, it doesn't bother me, but again, that's because I don't really think about it too much, I guess. It's like, I don't think books necessarily are condoning behaviors, or I don't think that like readers necessarily are taking that as like, oh, okay, I'm 18, so I should also be with a 40-year-old man. I don't think people are like really feeling that, personally. Okay, some of these next ones are very bold. First up, I hate book boxes. And you know what? I kind of agree with you. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say I hate book boxes. I just personally don't really see a lot of value in them, and I think that's just because of the type of reader I am. I actually really enjoy special editions of books. I don't want like 15 special editions, but if I find one special edition I really like, I'm totally down with buying it. And that's why I signed up for like Illumicrate a while ago, or like the Afterlight, the like romance version. But initially it was coming with like just one or two items with the book every month, and I was just finding myself not using the items, like basically immediately wanting to donate them. And I feel like that about most book boxes. The things in them don't add a ton of value, even if it's like art prints of the book. Like, I just don't display a lot of that sort of merchandise in my home. So like for me, I just don't really see a lot of value in it. So I definitely get that. I'm all for like special edition book covers and like, you know, creative, interesting new covers, because again, it gives cover designers work to do. I think there's like definitely value in it. It's just the accompanying things with book boxes I'm not a huge fan of. Oh, this is definitely a take. KU books are barely better than Wattpad. I don't agree with that at all. Definitely there's going to be varied quality in the books that are published on KU, but I think that it is wrong to call them a monolith. I also saw one of my favorite authors being, I don't want to say attacked, but kind of in one of these hot takes. I'm not gonna say the author's name, but here's the thing. I don't want to say I don't care about the writing of books, but I think some people are more discerning about the writing style than I am. I don't personally love repetition of the same word over and over again, because that's irritating. And I obviously can pick up on some like really poor stylistic choices, but for the most part, if a book is getting the point across and it's getting me to feel something, I'm not caring so much about like how the imagery and the metaphor is in the book. Like, I really don't care about that shit. So for me, KU and traditionally published romances, I don't see a ton of difference. I could definitely tell a difference, but it's not a quality difference to me. Yeah, it's like a different format almost, but it's I wouldn't say lesser than. And I definitely don't think that comparing it to Wattpad is necessarily bad. Hell, there are things on Wattpad that are actually good. I disagree with that so much. Probably because I want to be an indie author myself one day, and that's the format that I'm like really drawn to. But yeah, I don't think it's like lesser quality because you're publishing on KU. I love Book Talk for introducing people to reading, but it's lowering standards for book quality. Again, I don't know that I agree with that. I think that people are going to write to whatever is popular, and so there is more smut than maybe I'm comfortable reading all of the time, but they're writing to what's popular, and that has been done throughout time, right? Like, whatever is most popular is what's going to sell, and it's what's going to get published, and it's what's going to be around for forever, you know what I mean? I don't necessarily think that the standards of book quality are going down just because books are getting popular in a certain genre. It might not be my cup of tea, but like, I don't think it's poor quality necessarily. Being a fast reader doesn't make you a better reader. I think this kind of goes back to what we already talked about, so I don't want to, again, go into too much detail here, but I think that sort of tries to establish the idea that there is a good and a bad reader. What does that fucking mean? I don't think there is such thing. I think you can read purely for pleasure. I think you can read to expand your worldview. I think you can read to challenge yourself. I think you can read for a billion fucking reasons. And I think you can also read quickly or slowly, and it doesn't make you a good reader or a bad, like, what the fuck's a bad reader? I didn't like the book, but I understand why others would like it. I don't understand this, is what this person's saying. I guess I get it to an extent. Like, if you are basing your reviews off of what you consider to be objectivity, but there really isn't such thing as objectivity. I think for me, books can fall into two camps, right? When I dislike a book, I can either dislike it and think that the quality is poor and that maybe the message is poor and problematic. I don't understand how other people could like it, or it could be that there are tropes present that I dislike and there is stylistic choice that I just personally don't vibe with. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't understand why other people would like it. You know what I mean? Maybe you don't know what I mean if that's like not something you agree with, but yeah, I don't don't know. I think that's something that I think about more. I think as a reader and reviewer of books, like part of my job here is to express to you how I felt about a book and also hopefully give you some information going forward so that you can either pick up the book because you heard me talk great about it, or maybe not pick up the book because I didn't like it, or maybe you pick up the book because I didn't like it, but I told you why I didn't like it, and those are things you enjoy. You know what I'm saying? The female main character perspective is better than dual point of view if the dude only talks about how horny he is. I kind of agree with this. I sometimes find this in a couple of authors' works that I'm just like, what's the fucking point of this dude's perspective if all he's talking about is how hard his dick is, or like wondering what color her panties are? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, no, not for me. Pregnancy tropes can be good if done well. I kind of agree with this. I've read some books this year in specific that have kind of changed my mind. There's an Elsie Silver that I really liked with an accidental pregnancy. Yours truly had an accidental pregnancy. There's one other one. Oh, Out on a Limb. That one had an accidental surprise pregnancy at the very beginning of the book. I loved it. I think any trope really can be done well. I kind of like that this trope is becoming more popular and that the books that are being published are doing the trope successfully because this is something that happens in real life. And sometimes I think it can be nice to see yourself in a romance, right? If you've gotten accidentally pregnant, it might be nice to read a book about someone else who's gotten accidentally pregnant. Maybe that's not true. I don't know. The good girl line is in every book and it's too much. I agree with this. Perhaps it's because I don't have a praise kink, but I'm so over the good girl. Let's get a little more creative. I just think like that is maybe one of the things that I dislike, and that was actually one of the ones I didn't put on here, but I should have maybe, is a lot of authors are maybe coming up with the tropes before they write the book rather than having the tropes woven into their book successfully, you know, like, oh, I'm seeking out to write an enemies to lovers, single parent romance or whatever, and then they write around it. I think that can sometimes happen with heroes, right? Like you have this idea of like the sexy lines he's gonna say rather than like what's organic to the character, and or like making the person feel like a full-fledged individual, their own thoughts and feelings. Like not every male main character on the fucking planet needs to say good girl, you know what I mean? That's just my take. That's my take. When people tell you about a book and then they tell you what happens in the first chapter and they tell you it's not a spoiler, that's definitely a spoiler. I disagree with this wholeheartedly. One of the things that I don't think people agree on is like what constitutes a spoiler, and it really fucking irritates me. For me, spoilers only matter when it is a twist in a book or something that would hinder your enjoyment if you knew about it prior to going into the book, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to spoil something that is going to be a big reveal in a book. That's fucked up, right? Like, we're not going to do that to someone. If I offhandedly mention that someone got engaged in a romance, come on, let's be real fucking for real here. Romances are predicated on the idea that there's a happily ever after. And sure, I guess you could say being together and being engaged is not the same thing, but like, come on. For romances, I don't think that's the case. I try not to spoil things like third act breakups or like what the conflict is that's bringing these two apart necessarily, if again, that is like something that's like really important to discover on your own. But to like say the two characters end up together, that's not a fucking spoiler. It's just not. It's simply not. The more hyped a book is, the less I want to read it. I disagree with this, actually. I personally get so excited for hyped books. I think sometimes that can make it less enjoyable when I go into it and maybe my expectations aren't met, but I get really excited to read things that are popular because oftentimes I think that popular things are fun. I do. I always want to be someone who enjoys things. I do. I'm proud of the fact that I like ACOTAR. I think it's fun. I'm sad that I don't like Fourth Wing. I want to be a part of the hype. I want to be like other girls, right? And I'm not saying you don't want to be like other girls if you are someone who doesn't want to read a hyped book, but I'm just saying for me, for myself, I want to like a hyped book. I get hyped to read them. The miscommunication trope slays. I agree with this. I really do. I read a thread recently that said something to the effect of like, miscommunication trope and characters communicating poorly is not the same thing. And I think I agree with that. I think a miscommunication trope early on in a book where the characters aren't together yet and they're miscommunicating about like their feelings for each other, that sort of thing, I think that's hot. I don't think characters not knowing how to talk to each other when they've been in an established relationship for 15 years, like I don't think that's that fun to read about. That's just my own personal thing. And then the last one, audiobooks shouldn't count towards your Goodreads reading challenge goal. You guys know how to make me angry. No, I definitely think they should. I don't know why there's this just like frequent ongoing debate about whether or not audiobooks count as reading. They do. And I also think it's like slightly ableist to say that like audiobooks don't count as like what the fuck? I think because you can multitask while listening to an audiobook, people see that as like a lesser form of reading. That's really all that I could potentially come up with is a reason why people want to negate that as a thing. But I don't think it matters. I don't care how quickly you read, how slowly you read. I don't care if you read audiobooks, ebooks, hardcover books. I don't care if you're reading a great tome that is like greatly acclaimed. I don't care if you're reading the lowliest of published books that is hardly edited. Like, I don't care. Frankly, I think any of it can count towards your reading goal. I think you can count fan fiction towards your reading goal. I think you can count children's books towards your reading goal. It doesn't fucking matter. It's not that deep. And at the end of the day, whatever makes you happy is important. I had a fun time with this. I hope that maybe you gained something from it, and or maybe you learned a little bit more about my taste in things. But I love it so much. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with any of these takes. Yeah, that'd be fun, I think. I'll see you on the next one.